In the past, I've made plenty of premiere skin based videos. In fact, one of my very first videos on the channel was a premiere skin wish list for every single character on the roster. And recently I did a video that was, I say recently, it was over a month ago by now, but it was a updated version of that where I kind of went over a premiere skin for every single character, including the current DLC we had available to us. But this time I'd figured I'd actually take a list that was entirely ripped from the community. So, where am I pulling these opinions from? I'm pulling them from Reddit, I'm pulling them from my Discord server, and I'm pulling them from my comment section. Before I get into the actual list though, I want to go ahead and mention that I've got a goal for this month that probably won't end up happening, but it's still a goal of mine. I want to hit 15,000 subscribers this month. If we can make that happen, that would be amazing. So if you're new around here, make sure you're subscribed. And if you're not new around here, leaving a like on this video is a great way for new people to find the video. Regardless, let's jump straight into this list. Starting off with Batman. The community suggestion here is Batman Beyond. I like Batman Beyond. I think it's a great pick. It is a unique character, right? It's not just Bruce Wayne, and it's a character we don't currently have in the game. That being said, there is currently a shader to allow you to get that color scheme, which I think is one of the big appeals behind the Batman Beyond suit. So I don't think it's too big of a shame that he's not involved in this particular game. It also leaves open the possibility for him to be involved in a future title. Next up is Superman. We're going to be looking at Cyborg Superman. I like this suggestion a lot. Cyborg Superman was in Injustice 1 and wasn't in Injustice 2, so it is a bit of a disappointment that he didn't show up, and I mentioned him actually in one of the videos I made earlier this week, titled Was the Gear System a Failure? And in that video I addressed the concern of characters like Cyborg Superman being particularly difficult among the gear system, because if you wanted to have him in the game, rather than just making a costume, you have to make an entire premiere skin. There's a lot more justification that goes into making a premiere skin. You need to have custom voice lines, so I'm not surprised to not see Cyborg Superman, but I'm definitely more satisfied with the alternative, which is Bizarro. Next up is Wonder Woman, and we're going to go with Artemis. This is not a character I'm super familiar with, it's just one I pulled from my comment section. I did a little bit of research on the character and it seems like she would fit. It's just not a very popular character that many people will be familiar with, so I doubt it will ever show up in Injustice 2. This next one I like a lot, and I'm amazed I never thought of it, and that's Miss Martian for Supergirl. I mean, I'm honestly pretty disappointed in myself for never thinking of this one. Miss Martian doesn't have access to heat vision or frost breath, but there are things we can do about that with animations. I would have loved to have seen Miss Martian show up in the game. Obviously, she didn't show up this time around, and it doesn't look like she's going to have a premiere skin anytime soon, but especially with the appearance of Young Justice Season 3 happening, I'm sure that the demand for the character is going to be significantly higher, especially moving into Injustice 3, where we will possibly end up getting her either on the main roster or for DLC, because she is an excellent character, and it is a bit of a shame we didn't get her in Injustice 2. Ocean Mask. This was the most popular opinion in the comment section and on Reddit for an Aquaman premiere skin, and I understand why. It just makes perfect sense. It's absolutely the first character you would think of. Some people might think of Black Manta beforehand, but Black Manta made it in as DLC, so that makes sense. Next up is one I have addressed in a Q&A before, and it's Red Tornado for Atrocitus. I'm not super familiar with the Red Tornado character, so I don't really know what stretches would need to be made animation-wise. All I know about the Red Tornado character is his brief appearance in the Young Justice series. I say brief, he was actually around for quite some time, but it's never a character I fell in love with, so I'm not passionate about this one. I'm gonna leave that one up to you guys. Gorilla Grodd is next up, and he is actually one of the harder characters to pick a premiere skin for, right? Because he's just a big gorilla. A lot of people jump to the other gorilla characters, like Solivar, but surprisingly, the highest suggested character I saw on both, again, Reddit, my comment section, and all those good things, was Beast Boy. I suppose it makes sense. This is more or less, I think, going to be a mod in the future, or maybe PC or something. This isn't something I think they would do a premiere skin for, because you don't want to let down Beast Boy fans, right? Gorilla Grodd is already one of the hardest to play characters on the entire roster, so making it be him that gets the Beast Boy premiere skin would just be a huge letdown for all the people who really want to see Beast Boy, who are probably better off waiting for Injustice 3, where I'm pretty sure, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm like 99.9999% sure that Beast Boy will show up in Injustice 3. Next up is Deathstroke for Deadshot. Every time I bring this one up, man, I get a ton of hate for it. It's understandable. I'm passionate about DC as well. Plus, this one's just being pulled from the community. It's the one I saw the most requests for, so don't yell at me, yell at the community. Next up is Harley Quinn. This is one I had in my last list for sure, but again, I can't help it. This is just the most requested one from the community, and it's her daughter, Lucy Quinzel. I understand the motivation behind putting her on this list, but personally, I would just prefer Harley Quinn to not have a premiere skin, because I want them to use the Lucy Quinzel character in the future, perhaps maybe in a different way, rather than boxing themselves in to make essentially a Harley Quinn clone. The Flash is up next, and the recommendation is Kid Flash. I like this recommendation a lot. Personally, I would probably go with Impulse. I like Impulse a lot, but I think there's a pretty obvious reason we don't have Kid Flash or Impulse in Injustice 2, and it's not that they wouldn't make fantastic Premier skins, it's that I think in the future they're probably going to want to use those characters in the story. That's at least what I would imagine, because you don't want to put Kid Flash in the game as a Premier skin and then have him show up in a future game with an entirely different moveset. Next up is Blue Beetle. The most requests I saw for this character was Black Beetle. Again, a fairly obvious one. Next up is Bane, and the most request I saw for this character was Killer Croc. Understandably so. I don't think I would make a Premier skin for Bane. I would just leave him as he is, but if I was forced to make one, Killer Croc sounds about right. Next up is Poison Ivy. The one I recommended in my video was Killer Frost, which would obviously take a ton of animation work that isn't worth NetherRealm's time, and I didn't want to use Killer Frost again in this video, despite the fact that she was the most requested I saw on both Reddit and Twitter, and my own comment section. But this time I'm going to talk about the second most requested character, and that's Mira. Mira has the same problem as Killer Frost in the sense that there would have to be a ton of extra animation work that wouldn't need to be done for any other Premier skin, and I think we're just better off waiting for the character in another game. As awesome as Mira is, it's not worth anybody's time, including our time, to sit there and wait for NetherRealm to make a Premier skin, a quality version of this Premier skin that's actually good. Don't expect this one, despite how awesome it theoretically could be. Next up is Brainiac, and the only suggestion I saw was Manhunter, the Martian, Manhunter. I'm not in love with this suggestion for a couple different reasons. First of all, it sets a precedent of bringing back characters with old movesets and giving them a new one, but I understand why people threw this suggestion out there because there's not very many suggestions you can have for Brainiac. Some people suggested the Thinker. I'm not a huge fan of that suggestion either for other reasons, but that's for another day because I need to start talking about all these other characters, man. We still have so many to go. Next up is Robin, and this suggestion was Azrael. Obvious suggestion here. They both got big swords. I actually think Azrael was probably a character they intended to be on the main roster, because Ed Boon talked about this a while back where he was saying, oh, we don't want too many of the same types of characters on the roster, and he was talking about characters with swords. He didn't want to have multiple characters with swords, and what that sounded like to me was that, hey, we had Robin in the game and we were going to put in Azrael, but the moveset we came up with, it was just too similar to Robin. I mean, it makes sense, right? That being said, you can poke a hole in my theory pretty easily, which is, if they had a model ready to go, even if it was just a temporary model for Azrael, why wouldn't they finish that model and just make him a Robin Premier skin? Next up is Black Canary. Surprisingly, the highest suggested character I saw was Sindel. Despite the amount of hatred that MK characters seem to get whenever they're announced, there's a significant portion of the community who's passionate about their MK characters who would have loved to have seen Sindel be a Premier skin for Black Canary. Swamp Thing's highest suggested character was Clayface. Originally, at the start of Injustice 2, I was opposed to this one, but as they got better and better at making Premier skins, I think that this one would actually work. You can replace all of the flower effects and all of the tree stuff that he does with Clay, and he could be a very unique Premier skin, unlike any other one in the game. And it's a feasible amount of work as well. It would be a lot of work, and it would probably be the hardest Premier skin they've had to make, but it would still be something feasible as opposed to some of the other ones on this list. Next up is Catwoman. Catwoman's a hard one, man, but the suggestion the community came up with was pretty decent, and that's Huntress. Again, I think this one's decent. I'm not in love with it because Huntress doesn't get to use her crossbows, and it's kind of like a cool part of that character, and we don't get to see that if she's a, Premier skin for Catwoman. So I think most of us would probably just prefer to have Huntress be her own character so she can use a lot of that unique part of her moveset, or at least her theoretical moveset. But regardless, a decent suggestion, probably one of the better suggestions you can have for Catwoman. Next up is Cheetah. This is actually a gender swap, but it's the only suggestion I could find, and that's Wildcat. It makes sense. But again, gender swaps are deconfirmed. We're not allowed to do gender swaps because of hitbox reasons, according to NetherRealm. This is actually a future version of Bilbsy speaking to you now. After I've already edited this video, I found out that there's actually a female version of this character, so it wouldn't even need to be a gender swap. The most popular version of the character would have to be a gender swap. Next up is Cyborg. Cyborg is a tough one, because if you want to have a true Premier skin for him, you need to change a lot of his animations, a lot of what he is to the core of him. I recommended Constantine in my last video, but the community suggestion this time around, much to my avail, is Vibe. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to argue against Vibe's inclusion right now, despite how much that I basically petitioned for him. I love Vibe. I wish he showed up as DLC. Here's hoping he shows up in Injustice 3, but I don't think he would work as a Cyborg Premier skin, even though it's theoretically possible, right? The portals that currently, well, not the portals, but the mother box that currently opens up and then like a drone comes out and flies at the opponent could theoretically be like a portal he opens up and then like a random drone could come flying through. I guess that works. The idle stance that Cyborg has doesn't really suit Vibe, so I'm okay with him not being in the game, if it means the alternative is having him be a Cyborg Premier skin. I would also like him to have his own moveset at some point in a future game, and it looks like the Premier skins probably won't be getting that treatment. Next up is Green Lantern, and the community suggestion is Sinestro. It makes sense, but again, the big problem here is that Sinestro has a pre-established moveset within the Injustice games, so giving him a new moveset to be a Green Lantern Premier Skin is not something that I'm in love with. Next up is Firestorm. Community suggestion was Deathstorm. I think this makes sense, but unfortunately Deathstorm is in fact a shader, so don't get your hopes up for this one. Your boy Oliver Queen is up next, and the suggestion is Dark Archer. I would say it was Red Arrow, but I think I recommended Red Arrow in my video, so I'd rather not reuse him. Dark Archer is certainly an awesome character, and why not go one step further and get John Barrowman in to do the voice lines. Next up is Black Adam. The community appeal on this one was Shazam. I actually thought another character on this list was better suited for Black Adam, and I thought Shazam was better suited for another character on this list, which we'll get into in a minute. Next up is Captain Cold. Community obviously went with Heatwave. He's the obvious pick. It would be so awesome. Imagine the particle effects and all that crazy stuff they could do with that character. But Scarecrow, I had heard of him. I just never put the name to the face. When I googled him, I was like, oh yeah, that guy. I just didn't remember his name. Necron. I'm sure when I flashed the picture, most of you recognized him. Mongol is up next for Darkseid. It's a decent suggestion. I'm not in love with it. Character's not super popular though, so it's probably not going to happen. Next up for Joker, something that I never thought of, Two-Face. Two-Face is in fact a character in the background of one of the stages of Injustice 2, which in the past I would have said eliminates him from being able to be in the game in any other respect, but then Black Manta happened. Two-Face would certainly be cool, but I don't think he's going to show up as a Joker Premier Skin, because a lot of what Joker does is very Joker. Two-Face is much more calm, cool, and collected. Well, some portion of the time, right? That's the whole thing. Two-Face. And when he's angry, he's very angry. Joker is more playful. It's a strange way to describe Joker, but in this context, it works. Thomas Wayne for Red Hood. I love the suggestion. It'd be a little bit weird because Thomas Wayne isn't really someone who would be showboating as much as Red Hood does, right? The entrance animation that Red Hood does currently wouldn't really work for Thomas Wayne, at least in my opinion. I can't picture Thomas Wayne just jumping into a room and doing a somersault and shooting pistols just to show off and then like reloading the gun in the air. That's not very Thomas Wayne, but everything else about his actual moveset would work. Next up is Starfire, and the community went with Star Sapphire. Cool suggestion, don't think it's gonna happen, but regardless, a cool suggestion. One that I absolutely agree with is Cyber Sub-Zero for Sub-Zero. I mean, pretty obvious, right? This next character I actually never thought about before, but Batwing for Black Manta. It doesn't exactly 100% translate, and I'm not super familiar with the Batwing character, but on face value, he sort of works. It's hard to do a suggestion for Black Manta because the jetpack is just so unique to him. Next up is Raiden, and the community went with a character that surprised me, Weather Wizard. This is what I was talking about earlier. I think he's actually a better pick for Black Adam, and Shazam is a better pick for Raiden, at least in my opinion. But again, I'm just going with what the community gave me here. Weather Wizard for Raiden. Next up is Adam. I think we all know Ray Palmer. And finally, Hellboy's Premier Skin will be Etrigan. Hello, Bilbsy from the future yet again. I forgot to talk about Dr. Fate in this video for some reason, but the community most suggested character for Dr. Fate that I could find that wasn't a gender swap was Dr. Manhattan. I don't like this one at all. I don't even think it comes remotely close to working, but Dr. Manhattan's cool, right? Awesome picks all around. Solid picks from the community. Obviously, there's some in here I disagree with, and in all honesty, none of these are probably going to end up happening. But regardless, awesome suggestions nonetheless. Thank you guys so much for all the cool suggestions. Not all of them came from my community. Some of them came from Reddit, some of them came from Twitter, some of them came from, random plots all over the internet, but most of them came from you guys, and I'm super appreciative of that. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. My name has been Bilbsy. Remember to subscribe because we're going for 15,000 subscribers, and I will see you in tomorrow's video.